The iron-crowned tree was 400 years old, and it had never once been climbed by anything that walked on two legs. That changed on a wet afternoon when a man with a bad knee and a broken cargo hauler stood at the base of it, put both hands flat on the bark, and said out loud, "Yeah, you'll do." His name was Daniel Reyes. 2 days earlier, his drive coil had cooked itself somewhere above the planet, and he had brought the hauler down in a river shallows with more luck than skill. The ship was not going anywhere. Neither was he. The rescue window, if anyone bothered, was 4 to 7 months out. The planet was called Grello by the handful of people who had ever mentioned it, and its official file said Verdant Hazard Class 9. Daniel had read that file once years ago, the way a man reads a warning label on a can of paint. It said quarantine. It said no survivors. It said the local wildlife was uniformly lethal. He had walked around for 2 days now and had not been eaten, so he was starting to have opinions about that file. Far above, in a slow orbit, a Tessan warden named Ilo was watching him through a scope and taking notes she expected to be short. Her species was tall and thin and feather-crested, with hearing so sharp that a dropped cup could put her on the ceiling. Her assignment was simple: log the crash, log the death, file the paperwork. She had opened a new record and titled it with the human's registry number and the word pending. She had expected the human to dig in. That was what everything did on Grello: dig, seal, wait, die. Instead, the human walked. He walked for 2 full days with a stick in his hand, poking at soil, snapping branches to see how they broke, standing under trees and staring up into them for minutes at a time like a man at a museum. He did not fire his sidearm once. He barely wore it. On the third morning, he picked a tree and started cutting. Daniel had been a carpenter before he ever flew anything, and before that he had spent 4 seasons on a wildland fire crew in Oregon. Both jobs had taught him the same lesson in different accents. You do not beat a thing that is bigger than you. You red it, you get out of its way, and you build where it is not going. So he did not build a bunker. A bunker was a box you sat in while something outside learned your smell. He built up. The first platform took 9 days. He cut with a plasma saw until the cell died. Then with a hand saw he had pulled out of the hauler's tool locker, and he learned very quickly that iron-crown wood was named honestly. It ate 3 blades. He made a rope ladder out of cargo strapping and hauled every board up by hand, and by the end of it his palms were a solid sheet of blister and his shoulders had stopped complaining because they had given up. The whole time he talked, not to anyone, just out loud the way some men do when the silence gets heavy. 11 meters, he said, sighting down a board. 11's good, nothing that heavy climbs, anything that light I can live with. He was right about that, and he had worked it out honestly. In 2 weeks of walking he had seen tracks everywhere and had built a rough picture in his head. Big things on the ground, heavy, wide-footed, no claws made for bark. Small things in the branches, fast, light, curious. Flyers above that, but flyers wanted open air and a clean run, not a tangle of upper canopy. The middle of the tree was the quiet floor of the building. Nobody wanted it, so he took it. The first night on the platform, he did not sleep at all. The sun on Grello went down slow and the dark lasted 19 hours, and about 4 hours into it, something came. He heard it before he saw anything, not footsteps, a sound like a wall moving. Branches bent aside somewhere out in the black and did not snap, which meant whatever was pushing them was patient about it. Then a smell rolled up to the platform, warm and green and heavy, like a barn. Daniel lay flat on the boards with his hand on his sidearm, and did not draw it. The thing came to the base of the tree. He felt it through the wood, a low shudder in the trunk twice, 3 times as something enormous leaned. Then a wet snuffling at the bottom rung of his ladder. It went on for a long time. It sounded, and he hated himself a little for the thought, exactly like a cow at a fence. He did not move, he did not shout, he did not shine a light down. After maybe 10 minutes, the snuffling stopped. The wall of sound moved off through the trees, slow and unhurried, and the night went back to insects. Daniel lay there until his heart came down out of his throat. Then he sat up, found his notebook by feel, and wrote one line in the dark by touch. Did not climb, cannot climb, good. He read it back in the morning, and it was crooked and half off the page, but he did not cross it out. It was the first real fact he had about this planet, and he had gotten it by lying still and doing nothing, which he suspected was going to be the theme of the whole business. 200 kilometers up, Warden Ilo watched the human sit on his open wooden platform, in the rain, with no walls, and eat a ration bar with his legs hanging over the edge. She filed her report at the end of the local week. It was 3 lines long, and the last one read, "Subject has constructed an elevated open structure with no defensive perimeter. Estimated survival, 6 days." She was already, privately, less sure of that than she wanted to be. The rain came on a Tuesday, or what Daniel had decided to call a Tuesday, and it did not stop for 14 days. It was not weather in any sense he recognized. It was the sky emptying itself. The noise on his roof boards was so loud that he stopped trying to talk to himself, which he found he missed. Water came off the canopy in ropes. The forest floor turned into a brown river with trees standing in it. He had a roof by then, and 2 walls, and a rain catch made from a hauler panel bent into a funnel. He had gotten smart about the wood and stopped fighting it. He was, in general, becoming a man with a routine, and the routine was the only thing keeping him from thinking too hard about the 4 to 7 months. On the 6th day of rain, he looked over the edge and found that he had a tenant. She was parked in the dry ground under his platform, all 9 meters of her, and she filled it. From above she looked like a hill with a head. Armored plates ran down her back in overlapping rows, dull green and scarred, and her legs were tree trunks with feet. Her eyes were small and set low, and she blinked very slowly. She had backed herself in under the overhang, and she was, as far as Daniel could tell, extremely comfortable. His first thought was to get her out. The platform was 11 meters up, but she was tall enough that her back scraped the underside of it, and if she decided to lean, she could take his supports with her. He had a flare in his hand for a full minute before he put it down. "All right," he said, "let's just look at you first." He looked at her for 3 days. He wrote it all down because writing it down was how he thought. Wide, flat feet, no claws. She never once tried to climb. Teeth, when she yawned, were flat grinding plates in the back and blunt clippers in the front. He watched her strip a whole branch of leaves in one pull and work her jaw sideways for 20 minutes. She was a browser. She ate leaves. She ate a genuinely stupid amount of leaves, and she moved about as fast as a man walking slowly. She also did something else, which he noticed on the 2nd day and did not fully understand until the 3rd. Nothing came near the tree. He had gotten used to a certain amount of night traffic, small quick things in the undergrowth. Once, a pack of low, broad-shouldered diggers had come through and torn up 40 meters of root ground, and he had spent that night sitting up with a light in his hand. Since the big one had moved in under his floor, all of that had stopped. The forest simply rooted around her. Daniel sat with his legs over the edge in the rain and did the arithmetic. "You don't climb," he said down to her. "You don't eat meat. You are the size of a house, and everything on this planet knows it." He nodded slowly. "Lady, you are the best security system I have ever seen, and you cost nothing." He named her Big Girl because he was not a clever man about names. The next morning he cut an armload of the broad leaves she liked from the branches he could reach, dropped them at the base of the ladder, and went back up. She ate them. He did it again the day after. She stopped leaving. Warden Ilo, watching from orbit, wrote a report that day that she deleted twice before sending. She had gone back through the archive. She had found 4 separate survey deaths attributed to that same species, all of them classified as unprovoked charges. She read the field notes on all 4. In every case, the team had been moving fast through dense cover and had come out on top of the animal at close range. The animal had not hunted anyone. It had been startled by something bursting out of a bush. She flagged the file for review. Her supervisor did not respond. The choir arrived at the end of the reins. Daniel woke to whistling. Not one whistle, but 40, layered over each other in a rising and falling wash of sound that came in through the open side of his shelter and did not stop. When he sat up, there were small dark shapes all over his walkway. They had long arms and grasping feet and eyes like polished stones, and they were, without any hurry at all, robbing him. They took 3 spoons. They took his tool wrap and dumped the tools out to keep the cloth. They took 1 boot and left the other, which he considered a personal insult. When he shouted, they went up into the higher branches, sat there and whistled at him until he sat down. Then they came back. He spent 2 days angry about it. He built a latched box. They opened the latch. He built a better latched box with a pin, and they could not open that one, and he counted it as a win. But they kept coming, and on the 3rd night he stopped thinking about them as thieves and started thinking about them as a problem with a shape. "You're not hungry for my stuff," he said, watching one of them turn a spoon over and over in its hands with total absorption. "You just want something to hold." So he built them a platform. It was small and rough, and it took him a day and a half, hung 4 meters below his own and off to the north side, out over a fork he never used. He put a shallow bowl on it and filled the bowl with the yellow fruit they were already stealing off the branches anyway. Then he went up, latched everything of his own, and waited. It took them 1 night to find it. By the end of the week, the choir had claimed the lower platform completely. They slept on it in a heap. They argued on it. They dragged up bits of bark and leaf and their 1 stolen boot and arranged all of it in a pile in the corner, and they left his shelter alone, because his shelter no longer had anything loose in it and theirs did. Ilo watched the whole thing happen through a long lens and did not write anything for 2 hours. When she finally did, her entry was 1 line, and she sent it without softening it. "The human is not surviving the ecosystem. He is furnishing it." By the 2nd month, there were 4 floors. Daniel had not planned 4 floors. It happened the way a garden happens, 1 afternoon at a time, because he had wood left over and daylight to burn, and because a man alone will build to keep from thinking. There was the ground, which was Big Girl's, packed flat and bare by her weight. There was the choir's platform at 7 meters, permanently untidy. There was his own shelter at 11, with the rain catch and the clay fire pit and a door that latched. And there was a small open deck at 15 that he had built for no reason, except that the view from up there was the only beautiful thing on the planet. It worked, and he understood exactly why it worked, and he wrote it down one evening in plain words so he could look at it later and check if he still believed it. Everybody wants a different thing. Nobody wants what anybody else has, so nobody fights. Big Girl wanted leaves and shade and a wall to lean on. The choir wanted height, fruit, and objects to fiddle with. He wanted a dry bed and a place to cook. There was no overlap anywhere, and so there was no trouble anywhere, and the whole arrangement held together on nothing more complicated than 3 separate appetites and enough room for all of them. Then, on an evening at the end of the 61st day, everything on the tree went silent at once. Daniel noticed the silence before he noticed anything else. The choir stopped whistling, not tapered off. Stopped, mid-sound, 40 voices cut at the same instant. He looked down and saw them frozen on their platform, flat to the boards. Every eye pointed the same direction. Below that, Big Girl had pressed her whole armored flank against the trunk and gone as still as a parked truck. Daniel came out onto his walkway very slowly and looked where they were looking. It came out of the tree line the way a shadow comes off a wall, 6 meters nose to tail, low and long, moving with its shoulders rolling. Its coat was a dirty red-brown, so dark in places it was almost black, and it was covered in old scars that had healed pale. The head was broad and heavy, and the jaw hung slightly open. It walked like something that had never in its life needed to hurry. It stopped 40 meters out and looked up at the tree. Daniel did not move. He had learned by then that stillness was the whole trick, and he stood there with one hand on the rail and let it look. It looked for a long time. Then it came in. It did not come for him. It went to the rain-catch overflow, the shallow trough where the runoff pooled at the base of the north root, and it drank for 4 solid minutes. Then it lay down in the dirt 3 meters from Big Girl, who did not move, and it slept. Daniel did not sleep at all. In the morning he saw the wound. It was on the left shoulder, a torn puncture the size of his fist, and it had gone bad. The flesh around it was swollen tight and shining, and there was a crust of yellow along the bottom edge. The animal favored the leg badly when it finally stood. It had come to the tree, Daniel realized, not because it was hunting. It had come because it could smell standing water and it could not walk to the river anymore. He named it Rust for the color, and for the way it looked like something left out in the weather too long. "You're dying," he said from the walkway. "You know that, right?" Rust looked up at the sound and then put its head back down. What followed took 11 days, and Daniel was frightened for every hour of all of them. He started with a pole. He lashed a bowl to the end of a 4-meter length of cut sapling, put in a strip of the dried meat he had been rationing since the crash, and lowered it. Rust ignored it for a day. On the second day it ate. On the 4th day he shortened the pole to 3 meters. On the 6th he cut it to 2. On the 8th day he did the thing he had been building up to, and he came down the ladder with the bowl in his hands. He talked the whole way down. Not words that meant anything. Just a low, steady stream of nothing, so that the animal would hear him coming and never once be surprised. He set the bowl on the ground 8 meters out and backed up without turning around and climbed the ladder with his legs, shaking so hard he had to stop halfway. Rust ate. On the 11th day the animal slept in the afternoon, deep and slow, the way starving things sleep, and Daniel came down with a boiled knife lashed to a haft, a bucket of water he had kept on the fire for an hour, and every clean cloth he owned. He was shaking so badly he said so out loud. "I'm scared," he told it, crouching 2 meters away. "I want that on the record. This is the stupidest thing anybody has ever done." He put the point in and opened the wound, and it went the way bad wounds go, and the smell was awful, and Rust came awake with a sound that Daniel felt in his ribs. He froze completely, knife still in his hand, and did not run. Running would have ended it. He knew that with total clarity. He stayed crouched, low and still and visible, and he kept talking in that same flat voice, and the animal's head came around and its eyes found him, and it stared at him from a distance of 2 meters for what felt like a full minute. Then it put its head back down. He finished. He packed the wound, flushed it twice, and left. He climbed the ladder, sat down on his own floor, and shook for 20 minutes. Rust stayed. The swelling went down over 9 days. The limp went last. And somewhere in the middle of that, without any announcement, the animal stopped being a visitor and started being a resident, sleeping every night against the north root buttress with its back to the trunk. The change in the forest was immediate and total. The digger packs, which had been coming through every 8 or 9 nights and tearing up the ground, stopped coming at all. Not once. Their trails moved, and the new trails ran 400 meters wide around the tree. Daniel wrote it down. Big animal on the ground keeps the small ones off. Bigger animal on the ground keeps the big ones off. I am 11 meters up, and I have not fired a shot in 70 days. Then he added, underneath in slightly smaller letters, "I do not think this place is a death world. I think everybody who came here was in a hurry. There is a rule in the Tessin service that a warden does not take a survey vessel below 800 kilometers over a Class 9 world without written authority, and Warden Ilo broke it on a gray morning in the human's 4th month, because she could no longer stand not knowing. She told herself it was for the instruments. That was half true. The real reason was that she had spent 119 days watching a man not die, and every model she had been trained on said that was impossible, and she had started to feel like someone watching a card trick from too far away. She took the ship down to 400 and opened everything at once. The thermal picture came up first, and she did not understand it for several seconds, because it was wrong. There were too many large heat signatures in one place, and none of them were moving away from each other. She widened the sweep. 2 kilometers around the tree, she counted 11 distinct large-bodied animals from 4 species that the Concord's own survey file listed as mutually lethal. They were not fighting. They were not even close to each other. They were spread across the area in a pattern that looked, on her display, almost deliberate. She spent an hour mapping it before she saw it. Water. There were 3 separate water sources in the 2-kilometer radius, and only one of them was natural. The other 2 were runoff channels, cut shallow into the ground and lined with flat stone, running from the base of the tree out to the north and to the southeast. Feeding sites the same. Cut fodder was piled in 3 places, far apart, at 3 different heights off the ground. The human had separated them, not by force, by giving each one its own everything in its own place where none of them ever had to meet. And there were sightlines. That was the part that took her longest to understand. Around the tree, out to 60 meters in every direction, the understory had been cleared. Not stripped, not burned. Thinned carefully so that anything moving through it could be seen from a long way off and could see. Ilo sat back in her seat and thought about the archive. She had read every death on Grello, all 41 of them. She pulled the files up again with her hands shaking a little and read them in a new light, and the pattern was so obvious that she made a small distressed sound out loud in the empty cabin. 36 of the 41 had happened in dense cover. 39 of the 41 had happened during rapid movement. In nearly every case, the team had been running or crouching or moving fast and low through undergrowth where nothing could see them coming until they were 4 meters away. They had all died the same death. They had surprised an animal at close range, and the animal had done what any animal does when something bursts out of a bush next to it. The planet had never hunted anybody. The planet had been startled 41 times. She recorded her findings, attached the imagery, and sent it up the chain with a request for reclassification review. The review convened 8 days later, and it did not go the way she wanted. Counselor Barun of the Hadrek chaired it, and he was not a cruel man, which made him harder to argue with. He was heavy and gray and slow-spoken, and he had held the quarantine portfolio for 30 years, and he listened to Ilo's entire presentation without interrupting once. Then he said, "You have shown me a man who has been lucky for 4 months. I have shown you a functioning site," Ilo said. "You have shown me an unauthorized biological contamination of a sealed world." Barun folded his hands. "A human is living inside a Class 9 quarantine. He has altered its watercourses. He has fed and habituated an apex predator. He has cleared ground. Whatever else this is, Warden, it is a violation and it has a remedy, and the remedy is extraction and sterilization of the site." Sterilization of the site 2 kilometers. Barun's voice did not rise. "I am not punishing him, I am closing a hole." Ilo stood up, which her species does not generally do in council, and argued badly. She argued about the 41 deaths. She argued about the sightlines. She said at one point, and regretted the wording afterward, that Grello had never been a death world, only a world that nobody had the patience to live on. She said the quarantine had killed more people than the animals had. Barun let her finish. "An extraction team is already assigned," he said. "It departs within the day. You will accompany it as observer. That is the entire concession I am able to make." The team was 6 Concord regulars in sealed armor, and they came down 4 kilometers northeast of the tree because that was the nearest clear ground. And from the moment the ramp opened, they did everything wrong. Ilo watched it from the shuttle and knew, with a sick and helpless clarity, exactly what she was watching. They moved fast. They moved in a tight column with weapons up. They went straight into the thickest cover between the landing point and the tree because it was the shortest line, and they moved through it low and quick and quiet, 4 meters of visibility in any direction, 6 armored bodies pushing through undergrowth at speed. She got on the channel and told them to slow down and spread out and make noise. The squad leader told her politely that noise attracted predators. 800 meters in, the column came over a low rise and dropped down the far side into a stand of thick fern, and a digger sow with 3 young in a burrow under that fern felt 6 heavy fast things come over the top of her at a range of 3 meters. She did what any animal does. The screaming started 40 seconds later, and Ilo could hear it over the channel and over the trees, and 11 meters up in an iron-crowned tree 4 kilometers away. A man with a cup in his hand set the cup down and stood up. Gunfire in a forest sounds smaller than people expect. It came across 4 kilometers as a series of flat, dry pops, thin under the noise of the canopy, and it was the screaming underneath it that told Daniel how bad it was. He did not run. That was the first decision, and it was the hardest one because every part of him wanted to. He stood on his walkway for 8 full seconds and made himself think, and then he moved fast but not blindly. He took the smoke wad off the hook by the door, the fist-sized bundle of damp green leaf and resin he burned every evening to keep the biters off. He took a light. He left the sidearm. Then he went down the ladder and out along the north channel at a steady walk in the open, following the cleared ground, and he shouted the whole way. Not words. Just a loud flat 2-note call, over and over, the same one he had been making every day for 4 months. It took him 19 minutes to cover 4 kilometers, and by the time he got there, it was a slaughter in progress. The squad had gone to ground in a hollow with their backs to a rock face. 2 were down. 1 was screaming. Around them in the fern, low and broad and fast, the digger pack was circling and rushing and pulling back, and the squad was firing at them and hitting almost nothing, because they were shooting at things that came out of cover at 2 meters and were gone again in a second. Daniel came out of the tree line at a walk, upright in the open, making noise. He lit the smoke wad and threw it into the middle of the hollow. The smoke went up green and heavy and stinking, and every digger in the fern smelled the thing they had been smelling at the edge of the Ironcrown's cleared ground for 2 months, in a place where they had learned there was nothing worth having, and the rushing stopped. "Weapons down," Daniel shouted. "Stand up, all of you, stand up straight and stop moving fast." Nobody moved. "Stand up," he said again, and he walked into the middle of them with his hands empty, and something about a man doing that in a place like this cut through whatever was left of their training. 1 stood, then 3. "You're crouching," Daniel said. "You're low and you're quick and you're hiding. Every single thing here reads that as a small, fast animal in a bush. Stand up, be big, be slow, be boring." They stood. They were shaking inside their armor, and they stood. The pack held at the edge of the fern for a long half-minute, 4 broad, low shapes with their heads down, and then, one by one, they went. Not fleeing. Just leaving the way an animal leaves a thing that has stopped being interesting. The hollow was quiet. 1 of the squad was dead. 1 had a leg opened from hip to knee and was not going to walk. Daniel looked at the wound, looked at the 4 kilometers of forest between here and anywhere, and made the only call available. "Carry him," he said. "We're going to my place." The walk back took an hour because he made them do it his way, spread out in a wide line, upright, loud on the cleared ground. Nothing came near them. Warden Ilo came down in the shuttle and set it in the clearing, and stepped out onto the surface of a Class 9 world for the first time in her life, and stopped dead at the bottom of the ramp. There was a tree in front of her with a building in it. Not a shelter. A building, 4 levels of it, with a covered walkway and a rope ladder and a plank stair, and a rain catch funneling into a barrel, and smoke coming out of a vent. There was a burned plank hanging at the base of the ladder with something written on it in human script that she could not read. And under it, at the roots, there was an animal. She knew it from the file. She had watched a recording of one of these open a survey team's transport shell with its front claws. It was lying against the north buttress with its scarred head on its paws, and it opened one eye at the noise of the shuttle, and it looked at her for a moment, and it went back to sleep. 40 small climbers were fighting over fruit on a platform above it. A 9-meter armored browser stood in the shade of the trunk with her eyes half closed, working her jaw sideways, and a calf-sized version of her was pressed against her front leg. Ilo stood there with her crest flat to her skull and understood, in one whole piece, that she was standing on the safest ground on the most dangerous planet in the sector, and that a man had made it out of cut wood and hand tools because it had been raining and he had been bored. They got the injured man up the ladder. It took 4 of them, and it took a long time. Daniel cleared the floor of his own shelter, boiled water on the clay pit, and stood back while the squad medic worked. And when the medic's hands were too unsteady, he held the light and then he held the clamp. Halfway through it, something landed on the walkway rail. It was a young flyer with a wingspan longer than the platform was wide, and one membrane torn and healing badly, and it folded itself down on the rail like a bird on a fence, and made a low creaking sound and waited. 2 of the squad went for their weapons. "Don't," Daniel said without looking up. "That's Kite, he eats at 4, he's early." Nobody moved. The animal sat on the rail. The choir went on arguing below. Big Girl went on chewing. Rust went on sleeping at the roots, and the medic went on stitching, and not one animal on that tree reacted to any of it in any way at all, because none of them had been surprised by anything in a very long time. Ilo watched the human get up, get a strip of dried meat out of a latched box, and set it on the rail a meter from the flyer's head, and sit back down. She had her recorder running. She let it run. 19 hours later, Counselor Barun's flotilla came into orbit above Grello with sterilization authority signed, sealed, and 30 years overdue. The end of it was not a battle. It was a meeting, and it was held over a radio link, and for most of it, the man at the center of the argument was on his knees replacing a rotted board. Counselor Barun opened the channel from orbit and stated his authority plainly. The site was in violation. The world was Class 9. The remedy was extraction and sterilization out to 2 kilometers, and it would begin in 6 hours. Warden Ilo entered her objection, and it was not a good speech, because she was not a good speaker, but she had something better than a speech. She had 131 days of orbital log. She had a mapped survey of separated water and separated feeding and cleared sightlines. She had 4 surviving conquered regulars who had walked 4 kilometers through a Class 9 forest at a slow, upright walk making noise and had not been touched. And she had a live feed from a wooden deck 11 meters up a tree, showing an apex predator asleep at the roots of it. Then she asked the human to speak. Daniel put down the hammer and picked up the handset. "I'm not sure what you want me to say," he said. "Nothing here ever hunted me. Not once in 4 months. Barun's voice came back flat. 41 people are dead. Yeah, I read that file. Daniel sat back on his heels. I read it again a few weeks ago, actually. Every one of them died in thick cover, moving fast, every single one. Your people came down here and they ran through the bushes low and quiet because that's what you do when something's hunting you." He paused. Nothing was hunting them. They kept jumping out at things. You do that to a big animal at 2 meters and it hits you. That's not a monster, that's a cow in a barn aisle. There was a long silence on the link. "So what did you do differently?" Barun asked. "I built high so I wasn't in the traffic. I stayed where things could see me coming. I kept the same routine every day so nothing ever got surprised. I gave everything its own water and its own food in its own spot so nobody had to fight over anything." Daniel shrugged, though nobody could see it. "And when something showed up with a bad shoulder, I fixed the shoulder, because it was going to die otherwise and I had the water on the boil anyway. You are describing an act of extraordinary courage. I'm describing a campsite, Daniel said. Counselor, I'm a carpenter. I didn't beat this planet. I just stopped startling it. The silence after that ran long enough that Ilo thought the link had dropped. When Barun spoke again, his voice had changed, and what came out of him was the thing he had actually been protecting for 30 years. My objection is not that you died, he said. My objection is that you did not. There are 41 other worlds under this classification, Mr. Reyes. If I lift this one, people will go to the others. They will go with your story in their heads and none of your patience in their hands, and they will die in the bushes exactly the way the others died, and they will die believing that a man with a hammer proved it was safe. That is a real problem, Daniel said. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Then you understand why I must close it. No, Ilo said. Counselor, with respect. 41 people died under quarantine, not in spite of it. They died because the file said Death World, so every team that landed came down braced for a fight and behaved like prey the whole time they were on the ground. The classification did not protect them. The classification is what killed them. Nobody said anything for a while. A precedent that gets people killed, Barun said slowly, is what we already have. Yes. The counselor did not lift the quarantine that day. What he did was smaller and more useful. He suspended the classification pending a full behavioral study, and a study needs a site, and there was exactly one site on the entire planet where a research team could sleep through the night. That was how a treehouse became a conquered facility. 18 months later, it had 9 levels. Daniel had built most of them himself, because he had tried letting the engineers do it once and they had come with prefabricated panels and a sonic driver, and the noise of the driver had emptied the tree of every living thing for 3 days. After that, they let the carpenter build, and the carpenter used hand tools, and the animals watched him do it from 4 meters away and did not care. There were 3 Tessin researchers in permanent residence. There was a Hadrek observer who had come down for a 6-week rotation and stayed a year and who still would not use the ladder, so Daniel had built him a plank stair with a rail, and the Hadrek took extremely good notes and pretended the stair had always been there. There was a waiting list. It was 40 names long. The burned plank at the base of the ladder was still there. Daniel had written it in his 2nd month as a joke to himself, on a bad night, and the Concord Registry Office had photographed it, transcribed it, and entered it into the official record without ever once asking whether it was serious, and so the site's formal designation in every Concord document from that day forward was the hotel. Big Girl had a calf and then a second one. The choir had, by careful count, stolen every spoon that had ever come to the planet, all 61 of them, and kept them in a heap in the corner of their platform. Rust slept at the north root, and no digger pack had come inside 400 meters in 2 years. Kite's wing had healed crooked, and he still flew badly, and he still came at 4. On an evening at the end of the dry season, Daniel climbed to the top deck with a cup of tea in one hand and a hammer in the other, because there was a rail up there that had gone soft and he had been meaning to get to it. He sat down instead. The 19 hours were starting. The light was going out of the canopy in long green bars, and underneath him the whole building was settling in for the night, floor by floor, everything in its own place, nothing in anybody's way. He thought about the file that said Class 9. He thought about 41 people who had come here braced for monsters and found exactly what they were braced for. The whole galaxy had looked down at this place, Daniel thought, and seen monsters. He drank his tea. All he had ever seen was neighbors who needed somewhere dry to stand.